Hello, welcome to the Talking City podcast, your Manchester City podcast from the Manchester Evening News, and we are talking today about another defeat for Manchester City. 3 defeats in 4, back-to-back in the Premier League. This is what supporting City used to be like, and then we've become obviously used to all these winning runs and Premier League titles, but it was 1-0 at Arsenal. Another deflected goal in the dying minutes to give Arsenal the win rather than City. We'll be dissecting what happened, what went wrong, if anything, and where that leaves City in the title race. Joining me, Joe Bray, is Simon Bajkowski. Si, how's it going?
Good. Feels like it was only hours ago I was sitting next to you, Joe.
Well, we had a train journey back and we've basically gone through everything.
We should have just hit record, shouldn't we, on the way back? That would have been...
Maybe that's it, yeah, future.
And, nice for all the passengers on board as well.
Well, yeah, the opposite table won't need to listen to this because...
No, they've
got all of our thoughts.
Yeah, I don't think anyone will need to listen to it anyway because it's just going to be a lot of, it happens. So
this is it, because a lot of the headlines this morning are City are rubbish and, Arsenal have really got one over on them, but it wasn't quite like that, was it?
I've been amazed at the headlines.
Yeah.
I saw described in One National as something like an all-time stinker for City.
No.
It was when you have to go back and sort of watch the game again and check the stats again and. I feel like there's been loads of sort of analysis of City's stats and they only had 4 shots, which is the lowest City have ever had under Guardiola. It's the lowest that Guardiola's had since 2010. But Arsenal had 12, but City produced more threat, more expected goals with their 4 than Arsenal did with their 12. So if you're going to go on about how rubbish City were in attack, you've kind of got to say, well, Arsenal were technically worse, but in reality, just as bad. We both sat through 90 minutes, which were really pretty boring. David Raya didn't have very much to do. Ederson had even less to do. So it was a nothing game decided by a scrappy goal that wasn't going in until it took a massive deflection off Nathan Ake. And it sounds like a real cop-out to be like, well, it's football, it just happens. And when we're all dying for a good quote in the press conference and Pep comes out with it's football when he does, you're like, oh, come on, give us something better. But it genuinely, it is. Could have gone, City could have drawn, City could have won, Arsenal ended up winning. Fine margins.
That's it. I think if Nathan Ake's shot in the first half goes in or falls to any other player, City go ahead. If Alvarez is closing down a Bray, if that goes in rather than the side netting, completely different game. Arsenal just got the look, and I think they deserve a bit of credit for hanging in there to make sure that look counted. But
they do, yeah. But we're talking about the second best team in England last year. If City had played Oldham and Oldham had restricted Erling Haaland to 0.00 XG, then we'd be saying, wow, really good from Oldham, and what's Haaland playing at and what are City playing at? But it should be a really tough game. Haaland shouldn't get 10 chances to score a goal, and City shouldn't kind of steamroll them in the way that they did in April. So loads of credit to Arsenal, but Arsenal are a very good team who should expect to win the game. We're not talking about some competition winners.
It did feel like one of those games where it's 2 very good teams just trying to figure each other out. And
yeah, and it was unfortunate for City that really good chance fell to Nathan Ake, but it wasn't unfortunate for City that the only player they seemed to have who had time on the ball was Ruben Dias, because that was deliberate from Arsenal to be we don't mind him having time on the ball because his kind of attacking play isn't good enough, and it wasn't good enough to sort of create any real chances. So that is Arsenal catching City out. City did it plenty of times with Arsenal. Arsenal kept trying to play over the top. like trying to catch City out for pace, and Ake and everyone else just hoovered the ball up. It was just like we were sat there just like these teams are cancelling each other out.
It was a 0-0 game, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a 0-0
game.
A 0-0 game with a goal.
Yeah,
with a deflected goal.
And I was right in how it wasn't perfect, but they solved various problems, and they're looking like going forward they'll be better for having players playing in different positions, and they looked like they were better in defensive midfield without Rodri until the goal, and then suddenly it's, well, they can't cope without Rodri because they've lost 3 out of 3 when he's not there, and it required a little bit of a rewrite. But I think the goal has changed how people are looking at the game, when realistically it was just Arsenal lost twice to City last year, and now they've probably caught them up a little bit and are equaling them out. But as Guardiola said, last year City had less control at the Emirates and won. This time they had more control and lost.
Yeah, it's spot on. It's kind of like, it would be really interesting to see had City got a point. Because then it would be Arsenal have not beaten City despite City being without Rodri, Kevin De Bruyne, John Stones. They've never had a better chance to beat City, and they've not. And they nearly didn't. So you could say, if you wanted to, that like, oh, the result was coming, and City obviously got a bit of luck with Kovacic not being sent off, and you could say Arsenal deserved that victory then, and there are big problems at City, but I don't think it reflects the reality of the game, and cherry picking statistics sort of doesn't give any kind of accurate analysis.
And I think Guardiola's a bit more concerned against Wolves, giving the man of that defeat rather than Arsenal. And they faced Arsenal twice now this season, almost identical goals to late on. It was a draw in this Community Shield, and then Arsenal won on penalties. But it's not like Arsenal have cut them open a lot in these 2 games.
No. There's a half-time change at Wolves, wasn't there? So Guardiola was like really unhappy with kind of the way things were going, and his kind of first go, if you like, at replacing Rodri. Whereas this time he wasn't. Even with like Kovacic should have gone. He was asked in the press conference if he thought about substituting him at half time, and he was like, no. He's good with the ball, so he stayed on. It just kind of there were 3 subs, weren't there? Doku came on to have a bit of a go, and Nunes came on, and it was, Guardiola was kind of content enough with how it was going to make those subs, because I think we've all seen when he's like trying desperately to hang on to a result, or he doesn't have any faith in the bench, then he doesn't make any subs. But the fact that he made subs kind of signalled that, it was 0-0, last 20 minutes, why not have a go?
Yeah. Or
more of a go. It didn't really work out, but again, sometimes these things don't.
And it worked against Leipzig. He brought on Alvarez and Doku, and they get a goal and assist each, and it didn't quite work at Arsenal. You mentioned the Kovacic red card that wasn't. Let's start with the first one, the one that went to VAR. He got a yellow card. Should it have been red?
I don't think there would have been any complaints if it was red. It looked nasty, certainly on the replay. I think so. The Michael Oliver gave it a yellow card, and the VAR, having reviewed it, agreed with Michael Oliver that it was reckless, but only didn't think it was a clear and obvious error to give a red card. Didn't think it was worth taking him over to the screen to have another look at it. So they were confident that he'd seen what he thought he'd seen. So I think had he given a red card, I don't think they'd have overturned it, because I don't think...
Not at all.
But that is just one of those refereeing decisions that went City's way. Although it's one of them, I feel like it's the correct interpretation of the rules, but having seen like Curtis Jones last week and things like that, people will say, where's the consistency? Although, let's get into the women's game if we want to talk refereeing and consistency. But I think the second one, like minutes later, obviously nowhere near as bad a tackle, but it's bad and it's late, and it's the tackle that you should not be making when you're on a yellow card. And it is a second yellow every day of the week.
Yeah. So we've seen some pretty foolish second yellows this week.
Yeah.
And that was one where you're just thinking, what are you doing diving in?
Yeah.
And I hate the phrase orange card, but that first one was probably on the border between yellow and red. So
Yeah.
to dive in like that was very, very risky.
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite as stupid as putting your hand round someone's throat, but it should have brought the same result, and City should have been down to 10. It was like just brainless from Kovacic, really.
I think the only defence I'll give him is that after the Curtis Jones one and was it Malo Gusto over Chelsea, everyone was saying that's not a red, and the referees were getting criticised.
Yeah.
So do we give the referees a little bit of credit for saying, actually, we've listened to the feedback?
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah. And it's hard, isn't it? Because, they could have let Michael Oliver go and have another look at it, but then that slows the game down for another minute, 90 seconds, and he looks at like really slow motions and they're under pressure not to show. People don't like the fact that slow motion makes things look worse, so does he look at real-time replays? And if at the end of it he says, no, that's exactly what I thought, decision stays, then is everyone like, why have we wasted 2 minutes? We complain about everything is the short answer. But it is a good point that, we want consistency, but we also want referees to kind of learn from their mistakes.
And I think, forgetting when you think that should have been a red card or not, he did referee the game quite well. Like when Kovacic dives in the second time, he immediately said no.
Yeah.
He made it very clear. He shut down any sort of dissent. I don't think the referee was sort of played an impact on the game where they clearly have in recent big fixtures.
Yeah. No, I thought it was controlled pretty well, kind of largely helped by the fact that there was sort of no goalmouth action or no real kind of issues to speak of. But yeah, we should say well done to the refs when they have control of a game,
especially after the week that they've had.
Yes,
it's a good process, let's say. A bit of a new system. We saw the team sheet come out and we thought, okay, Rico Lewis has kept his place, deserved after Leipzig. Bernardo's there, he'll go on the wing, Lewis will be midfield, Alvarez will be behind the striker, but that isn't how they lined up. It was sort of Lewis as the number 10, Alvarez coming in off the right, Bernardo in defensive midfield. Did that work?
Yes and no. I feel like it was the primary reason why City were disjointed in attack.
Yeah.
Because I think moving Alvarez and Foden away from the middle where they've been close to Haaland, like City battered Arsenal in April by just knocking it up to Haaland and him heading it on for Kevin De Bruyne to sort of run on and score. Now there was kind of no one as close to Haaland, and certainly not in the central spaces where Alvarez and Foden have had good starts to the season, both of them, and they really struggle to have the same impact, I think. But it worked in that Arsenal didn't create anything.
Yeah.
So, don't know. What did you make of it?
Well, I saw Lewis in the team sheet. And I think, right, well, the idea will be to get him in those sort of inside right channels as he did at Leipzig, and we didn't see that because he was playing a bit closer to Haaland. He didn't have a bad game, did he, Rico Lewis? But I'm not entirely sure it was the right game for him. But then you can't really drop him after how well he played against Leipzig. I like Bernardo Silva in that defensive role, and I think that makes sense to play him there, given that you haven't got Rodri, and you couldn't play the same Foden and Lewis partnership without Rodri because they don't have that sort of tactical awareness between them yet, which is understandable. I think, was it Guardiola said that he just wanted to put as many players in the middle as possible?
Yeah.
Which, again, is understandable, and you sacrifice the width for that. But again, you probably have to credit Arsenal a bit by keeping that sort of midfield battle quite tight. They've got Rice, Ødegaard, Jorginho for the first half. It was just, I think they just cancelled each other out, and if they had Rodri, it would have been an entirely different game. It was
in one sense, it was a strange game, but in other, it kind of followed the path of previous meetings between the two. Like, especially, it was basically like the game last February at the Emirates, but without the sort of goal mouth action. But City would have a spell on top, then Arsenal would have a spell on top, then City would come back, then Arsenal would. It didn't feel like, any one side or any one midfield was particularly dominating the other. I thought Odegaard played well. I thought Rice was okay. I didn't think he was kind of like...
I didn't really notice him, but I suppose his job was
that is the job, yeah, but...
to not be noticed, but also help Saliba out and keep Haaland quiet. And
yeah, but, there were... I thought Lewis had kind of an important run in the second half that kind of helped City get back control of their game and sort of go on the offensive a bit more. There were momentum swings, but not great momentum swings because neither side was creating chances. So, yeah, you credit the teams and you credit the two setups, but it's just a weird game to talk about.
I think just because if any team was going to win it, it was going to be a lucky deflected goal like that, or a moment of genius, or it wasn't going to be a sort of a free-flowing move because neither team put that together in the whole game. And I think I said last night, City came away 2 years ago and Rodri scored that goal in the dying seconds and maybe they didn't deserve it.
Yeah.
And then Arsenal have got this one late on and probably didn't deserve it either. But yeah, it's not the disaster that we're talking about. What was Pep saying at full time? He was pretty calm, wasn't he? And he was...
Yeah, he was very calm, yeah. He said it's a long season. One interesting thing that he did say on a few of the broadcast interviews he did was that, maybe City need to be behind to kind of stir them a bit. And that, I feel like that is the kind of one of the main takeaways from the game. Guardiola's often kind of wondered or worried about how his team will respond to success. And having won the treble last season, the big question is there, how do you bounce back? Everyone expects a drop-off. Everyone expects a drop-off when you win the league. When they did last season, they sort of tumbled a bit. Not much, but, these things happen. So it's kind of interesting that it's still there for Guardiola, just thinking, maybe we do need a bit of adversity to, really hit our stride. Because the other thing to say is, as much as they played as well as Arsenal yesterday, is they've not really played that well this season.
No.
Like a number of times where you've thought, they're not going to get the points here, and then they have done. Like conceding late to Sheffield United or Fulham, they sort of got a bit of luck with that Nathan Ake decision, and it hasn't felt like they've played well, but they've been top of the league, and they're 2 points off the top of the league now. So obviously you don't want to go 10, 12 points behind, but it's kind of interesting that Guardiola's thinking, maybe not being top of the table, having not played well, is not the worst thing, because we're not kind of suckered into thinking how brilliant we are. We don't have to do anything and we can win this league.
Well, that will tie in nicely for part 2, where we're talking about the City's 3 defeats in 4 back-to-back in the Premier League, and apparently now that's a good thing. So join us again in a minute after the break, and we'll be discussing what's gone wrong in the last week or so. Hello, welcome back to the Talking City podcast. We've discussed and debriefed the Arsenal result, and now we're looking at a little bit of a wider picture. They've had 3 games without Rodri, 3 defeats, 1 game in the middle against Leipzig where they won, but 3 defeats out of 4 isn't what we usually expect from City. It's back-to-back defeats in the Premier League for the first time since 2018. Is it a problem? Because I would say that all 3 of the defeats have come with a caveat. There was lots of changes against Newcastle, and Newcastle won the game when they brought on 2 very good players and only just won the game by 1-0. Wolves did a job on them, and by their own admission couldn't do that every week and just caught City on an off day. Arsenal away is always going to be a difficult game. It's not like they've lost three games to 3 really poor teams.
Yeah, I tell you what, if it's a problem, it's nowhere near as big a problem as it was in December 2018 when they lost those 2 games.
Yeah.
It was Palace at home and then Leicester away. And I remember the team arrived at Leicester having lost like awful performance at home to Palace. And then they arrived, it was just after Christmas, and sort of you see the team arriving and you're like, there's no Fernandinho. There's no Fernandinho. And you think, how are they going to manage without Fernandinho? And they didn't. And then I think they were like 8 points behind, so Liverpool had made the best start ever in Premier League history or close to that, and you're thinking it's going to be too far. And of course they played them in January, I think it was the next game, and beat them, and that proved important in them getting 98 points and beating Liverpool who had 97. But there, you couldn't really see how City would cope without Fernandinho, and they had other problems, like Kyle Walker was dropped and other kind of issues. And they turned it round, and they don't seem to have as big issues this time. Like you say, important caveats. I sort of dispute the idea that they're too reliant on Rodri. Because we just don't know. Like, they're certainly not too reliant on the fella that puts his hands around someone's throat. Like, when we talk about how good Rodri is, you sort of have to ignore the performances where he does something like that. But also, they can't cope without Rodri, but also when they've not got De Bruyne or Stones, like if Stones had been fit and playing as he was in the Champions League final, he could have come in on his own and played in that Rodri role and probably been very, very good. So you didn't really notice Rodri was missing. If De Bruyne had been fit, someone else could have played in that role, and De Bruyne's presence and ability might have masked more the fact that Rodri wasn't there. If Nunes or Kovacic had been 6 months down the line and more versed in what is expected of them at City, it might have been a different story as well. Or they all might have been fine already and Guardiola just got his tactics wrong. Could be, could not, but we just don't know is the answer. Like, we thought it's going to be a massive miss for Rodri, and it has. We say 3 losses without him, probably 2 because he wouldn't have played the Carabao Cup either. So it is 2 losses. I'm with you. I think the Wolves one is worse than the Arsenal one, really. And he will be back against Brighton. So again, it's kind of like problem solved. It's not like I say 5 years ago when it was like, how do they cope without this guy? It's like, oh yeah, this guy's back next game.
I do think he's probably lucky in a sense that they have lost 3 in a row. And I'm talking about Rodri because we've seen players get sent off stupidly in the past. I'm thinking Cancelo and Walker, and they've been out of the team. And in Cancelo's case, didn't really get back in. Rodri is a different case, but he might have worried that he would get the same treatment. I don't think Guardiola can afford to leave him out when he comes back, because we saw against Leipzig, he's got such a calming presence and keeps that team ticking. But I also think Guardiola's used these games to try something different. He's not just played Phillips 3 games in a row. I don't think Phillips did badly against Newcastle, but he didn't do anything particularly amazing. He tried sort of Kovacic and Nunes against Wolves, but it didn't quite work, and Nunes was getting a lot of grief from the stands. And then he tried sort of Bernardo and Rico Lewis, that sort of combination. I think they will be stronger for it, and like you say, De Bruyne will come back, Stones will come back later in the season, and immediately that's a much stronger system in midfield. So I'm not sure we're going to see a lot of headlines over the next couple of weeks of how reliant City are on Rodri. Yes, they've lost 3 in a row, but also I don't think Guardiola played his preferred sort of replacement in any of these games. I think he's tested them out a little bit. No,
I think Phillips is probably the biggest loser from it all.
Yes.
In that, you spoke to him after
Forest
game, and he was saying, what a big week it was for him. And then, not a bad performance against Newcastle, but he is seen as kind of like the man step up when Rodri isn't there, and he is still at the England squad because Gareth Southgate thinks he's the best holding midfielder in England, or English holding midfielder after Declan Rice, and he also can play alongside Rice and bring out, the best in the team, whereas in City's case, he's getting kept on the bench and Pep's playing an 18-year-old English player ahead of him who isn't getting in the England squad. So there's a bit of jarring, but it's kind of like Rodri is very difficult for one person to replace.
Yeah.
Because, again, why wouldn't he be? Someone was saying yesterday, you can't have two Rodris in your squad.
No.
You can't have two Kevin De Bruynes in your squad. There's a reason why Rodri is Rodri and Kevin De Bruyne is De Bruyne. And I agree with you that Pep will have to bring him back straight away. So it helps Rodri. But you would also like to think that, this guy, one of the captains, one of the 5-man leadership group, has had a serious word with himself and seen how the team have played without him to say, I can't be doing stupid things again, because everyone loses out when that happens.
Well, after Forest, I think that was the fear, wasn't it, that City have got these big games and Arsenal's the third one that they'll miss, and what are they going to do? And Guardiola said something about Declan Rice, didn't he, in the build-up, that you can't have the two players, really. It was along the same lines of what you've just spoken about.
He said he was asked about Rice, and he sort of said, we wanted him for when Rodri isn't available.
Yeah.
And he, maybe he was saying he was never going to play unless Rodri wasn't available. But we had sort of peppered him with questions about how you're going to solve your Rodri problem. So it was that sort of could just have been that he was saying, you're asking me what I'm going to do without Rodri. This guy would have been perfect. But it's coming down to, you can't have two Rodris. You can't have a £105 million Declan Rice sat on the bench wrapped in cotton wool for when Rodri decides to get sent off. It's not the kind of sustainable solution for anyone. So, they got Phillips, who they paid £45 million for, and he doesn't seem to be the solution either, which is a problem for player and club. But other than that, it's kind of there isn't really any other solution other than Rodri's back, which he is. So, and they have to hope that he doesn't get a long-term injury. But when he does get a long-term injury, or if he gets a long-term injury, the situation should be different in that, John Stones won't be out for the whole period, Kevin De Bruyne won't be out for the whole period. So it won't be identical circumstances, and they won't be playing the same teams.
I think what these games have shown is that, exactly as you say, City don't have another Rodri or even two players in any position that are identical. But what they do have is a lot of players who can play in multiple positions. So we know Pep doesn't like hearing that City have two players in every position, but they do have more than one option in every position. So Alvarez has played in these last 4 games, he's played as a striker on his own, he's played behind the striker, he's played wide. We've had Foden, Alvarez and Bernardo all playing on that sort of inside right role. Lewis has played right back, defensive midfielder, number 8, number 10 at times. There's a lot of players who can all move about to suit the system that he wants to play. And it's not worked against Arsenal, but he's got that sort of system and that team who he can put players in a position to try and hurt the opposition rather than just swap Rodri for Phillips, for example.
Yeah, he's not physically got 2 players for every position, because he's not got 20 outfielders who, 10 of them sit on the bench every week and moan. He's got probably 15, 16 outfielders that can play in multiple positions, like you say. And Arteta was speaking about afterwards how difficult it is to face City, because they're always switching positions. And he spoke the other week, didn't he, about how he played 43 formations against somebody and 36 against someone else. So, it is constantly changing. I think over the years, as Guardiola has evolved and the team has evolved, you see someone like Bernardo Silva, who goes from playing, multiple positions over the course of the season to multiple over the course of a game. And to go back to 2018, when City didn't have Fernandinho for a long time, and Ilkay Gundogan played in that role, but it wasn't like he played as an 8 and a 6. He went from an 8 to a 6 and played as a 6, and that was seen as like, oh great, he can play 2 roles. Whereas like, Bernardo Silva, who played this game last year at left back, spent most of his time basically in front of the defence yesterday, but then moved out to right wing and then came inside again. So we're seeing kind of more fluidity within games with sort of tactics and positioning, and the players like Bernardo and Lewis and Foden and Alvarez who can all do that, which you would expect will make City better tactically.
Mm-hmm. And then you've got players like Doku who can come off the bench and did well at Leipzig, maybe didn't quite have the effect at Arsenal, but even it's different tactics as well, different options.
Yeah, it was a bit of a battering ram against Arsenal, wasn't he, Doku? But he started, he made 3 runs down the right, didn't get any change, immediately switched to the left. It was like, fine. Yeah. Like, Doku is only coming on and doing that if Guardiola is content to do it and content that City might lose the ball more than they were doing. And again, he wouldn't be doing that if he wasn't okay with how they were playing.
Yeah. And he brings that risk of giving the ball away, but also the reward that we saw against Leipzig. So it's pros and cons, isn't it, of what you want for the game. He could have brought on Grealish and
exactly,
it would have been 0-0, but Doku could have won the game.
Yeah, and that is like 25 minutes of risk rather than starting him and having 65 minutes of risk, or starting him and saying, right, well, don't do that until the second half, which is a waste of what you can do.
One more player who's got a lot of headlines, and I'm sure will over the next couple of weeks without any games, is Erling Haaland. No shots. I do think his link-up play is getting a lot better. He dropped deep at Leipzig for that goal on the break, and he was doing the same, and it was very effective against Arsenal last season at the Etihad, but it just didn't quite come off for him, did it?
No, it didn't. He didn't get anything from Saliba or Gabriel, who both defended very, very well against him. You kind of need to be physical against him, but you also need to be alert, and they were. Haaland, I would say, fits into like the wider narrative of City. Like, if you've watched them over this time, he's not played that well, and like he probably should have double the number of goals he's got because he's wasted a lot of chances. But there are times and there are games when he's really tightly marked and City are unable to create chances. But there have also been times where he's missed loads of chances. He's played 8 games in the league, and City have played 8 games, and he's scored 8 goals. So if that is replicated over 38 games, he's scoring 38 goals, and he's breaking his own record by 2. So, like, his XG was nothing yesterday, and he's not scored in 3 games in all comps, I think, and 1 in 5. But again, if you take it from a wider sense, he's probably going to score loads of goals this season.
I think he said, hasn't he, that this season players are double marking him a lot more, which is making it harder. But
yeah. But he said as well that, it frees up space for other people, and like last season that was De Bruyne and Gundogan, and this season they're still working out how to be close to him and how to get the runners for him. So it is just, I can see why he makes headlines, but like I'm surprised he scored as many goals as he has, because the misses stay with you more, I think. But then you look at it and you're like, 8 goals in 8, right, two more goals than anyone else in the league. Right, well, I don't think the fact that he's not scored against Arsenal means that he's going to not score for the rest of the season. He might score fewer goals than last season, perfectly possible. It might be worse than last season, but on, rather than sort of take the 1-game approach, take the 8-game approach, and he scored quite a few.
And Guardiola always says, doesn't he? He says, if he's not getting the chances, that's when you worry. And no, he didn't get the chances, but I think you do have to put it in the context of 2 very good defenders against him, and a system that didn't play to his strengths at all, and a game that just nobody got any chances. Yeah.
And I think back to, we spoke to him before the Champions League final, And I think he'd kind of not been in great goal scoring form then. And someone said to him, like 1 goal in 8, is it a concern? And he said, yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Or 51 goals in 52 games and 7 assists. And you're like, right, yeah, that is a good way of looking at it, yeah. And he will have times in the season where he's better, and times where he's worse. And I think you've just kind of got to roll with it. Like when he came last season, he redefined what we expect from him and from a goal scorer. So he has to live up to those expectations, but at the same time, like, it is still scary the numbers he's achieving even when he's not playing well.
And last season he didn't score against Real Madrid, Inter Milan, Man United.
Yeah.
Still won the treble.
Yeah. But he did score against like United at home and scored 3, and he scored home and away against Arsenal. I saw something saying, based on yesterday, saying how he did score in another big game. And it's like he basically scored against everyone last season. He didn't score in a few games towards the end of the season.
And he scored at the Emirates last year when City needed to win.
Yeah. And he took them apart. And he's also got some decent assists this season. I think he's on 2.
Yeah.
But again, those kind of don't get spoken of. And like you say, his link-up play. So, yeah, we're in danger of being like, everything is brilliant at Man City. But it's kind of more like things are nowhere near as bad as is being made out.
I just fear over the next couple of weeks that with no games to write about, but
it's all
snowball into.
Yeah, but I remember
disaster.
in 2019, City lost to Wolves before the international break, and they lost 2-0, and it was a dreadful performance. And you could tell City were nowhere near where they needed to be, and Guardiola was worried, and there were like so few positives to take from the performance, and like Stones and Otamendi couldn't trust as a centre-back pairing. He didn't have any centre-backs he could use, and they looked brittle, and they were like missing 4 big chances a game, and you thought they're really going to struggle. And it was 2 weeks of kind of doom-mongering and like what's going on, and then you look at how they are set up going into this break, and it's not like, oh, remember 99 when we were in the 3rd division. It's like, just look at how the situation looked, and it's pretty good.
And I was stood in the mix zone where all the players had to pass us to get the coach, and no one understandably wanted to stop, but most of them were in their own clothes and heading off to international duty, and they can quickly put this behind them, forget about it, and come back and just focus on the run of fixtures afterwards. And they know it's not the biggest defeat, and if you're going to lose to Arsenal, you do it in October and at this stage of the season.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic win for Arsenal, and they might take loads of confidence from beating City for the first time under Arteta and ending 12 straight league defeats, and that might be the thing that they use to go on and win the title. But as of now, with 30 games to go, it's still very much in City's hands, and they are better than any other team at knowing how to get over the line.
Yeah. Well, there you are. Everything is positive. Nothing to worry about. We will be back after a short break, and we'll be discussing something a little bit different to what we normally have a go at. Hello, welcome back to the Talking City podcast. By now we've completely discussed the Arsenal game and decided there's no crisis at all. We're going to have a bit of a change of tack now and discuss how we come to player ratings and reports and that sort of thing in a game. And I think yesterday's game was quite a good one to sort of centre it on, because it was a late goal. Everyone was sort of frantically rewriting what they were doing, and as I mentioned, I was relatively positive, and then I had to sort of tone it down a little bit with the context. But what's that like when there's a late goal and you've got to sort of change tack? Because the goal didn't change the performance, did it, yesterday?
No, I would say late goals and sort of certainly goals that change games are usually worse for the report that you're writing than the ratings. But yesterday's game is a good example because, City lost and they barely created anything. But if you were rating the players on their performances, they were kind of okay.
Yeah.
I think I gave like 6s and 7s apart from Kovacic, who got a 4. But it's player ratings are very funny because they are the thing that get the most kind of engagement and the most anger from people who sort of reply to tweets, or you get emails about player ratings from people absolutely furious that you gave someone a 7 instead of a 6 or an 8 instead of a 7, and there's nothing quite like player ratings for just like causing people to kick off and be abusive and or just really angry at the marks you've given. And like it's hard because it's kind of subjective. It's very subjective. Like I tend to start with like everyone on a 6.
Okay.
And
because it'd be tempting to start
there
with a 5 because that's middle of the road.
Yeah.
If I'm doing them, I start on a 5, and if you have an okay game and don't do anything wrong, you're on a 6.
Right,
and then if you do something good, what? So you start on a 6.
So I start, and if you do okay and don't do anything wrong, you get a 6.
Yeah.
But even between us at the same publication, it's we have different approaches. I'm sure maybe on the United side and like other papers, you get people giving half marks and things like that. So again, don't do any half marks, just do. And then it's also hard to escape your own like built-in expectations of individual players.
Yeah.
You know, if Erling Haaland's scoring 3 goals every week, does that, you know, if Kyle Walker had scored 3 goals, then he'd possibly get a 10.
Yeah.
But if Haaland's scoring, I feel like Haaland's scored 3 and he's had 8s before, because it's like
that could be the only thing he does in the game.
The overall performance, and you know, if he scored like the 4th, 5th, and 6th in a 6-0 win or something, or so, and like De Bruyne is probably my big weakness, but like when De Bruyne plays, it's just like, oh my word, he's the best player on the pitch. But does he get like a 9 because he's better than everyone else? Or if he's played like under himself, does he get a 5 because he's under his own expectations? So,
but that's still better than a lot of other players.
But exactly, yeah. So I find it very, very hard to balance up those kind of things. I also find ratings are a bit reductive in you kind of looking to give people points or take points away. So you're like, oh, that was a really good pass, have a mark. Oh, that was like, you know, so Rodri in the Champions League final is a brilliant example. What mark would you give Rodri out of 10? Because he had an awful performance.
He didn't play well.
No, but he scored the goal that has won City their most important game. So what mark do you give him? I think I gave him a 7, but I said in my score like it would have been a 4.
Yeah.
So it is a bit of just kind of like maths of like, and ticking boxes like, well, yeah, that's good, that's bad, that's Ederson makes a save, 7. Ederson makes a blunder, 5. And for that, and also with City, they never tend to be terrible.
No.
Like,
what's the lowest you've given? Like, what constitutes a 1 or a 2? Because you've got to be.
Yeah, see, I don't know if I've given a 1.
No.
Maybe a 2 for a red card.
Yeah.
You know, I was off for the Forest game. I probably would have given Rodri a 2.
Yeah.
But
because that's the sort of incident that overshadows the whole performance.
Yeah,
you can have a good game before that, but
and
when you do something as stupid as that.
Yeah, like Kovacic got a 4. He was completely fine for like 67 minutes of the 68 he was on, but those 2 stupid things were like, they really could have cost City, regardless of the fact that he didn't get sent off. It was like, those were stupid. I
remember the first one I did was Brighton away just before the Champions League final, and City had won the league, and it was just about players trying to get into the thing.
Yeah.
Cancelo gets sent off, 10 minutes into the game. He's not done anything.
But it was a harsh red, I seem to think, was it?
It was, but I was right up at the top, and it looked like it just hacked him down or like tripped him up. So I was thinking, this is the first time I'm doing ratings. Am I going to give someone like a 1 or a 2? Because the only thing they've done is got sent off. And luckily, you guys were saying like you could see the replay, I couldn't. You were like, no, it was a harsh red card. But that was a harder one to do because, especially when he got sent off so early. It was a difficult one to assess.
You've literally done kind of nothing well, have you?
But yeah, no, you are right that they're and the little comments you make in your rating to justify it get picked up, don't they? And
yeah. And the other things to add is that kind of usually because they're for on the whistle, we tend to get them ready for like 5 minutes before the end, so that we can concentrate on the report and everything else. So generally, they're kind of like 85 minutes worth of ratings. So the last 5 minutes, what they do, sometimes it's not, sometimes Edison might make a few late saves and you have to remember to bump him up. I got a very angry email the other week because I'd missed off Sergio Gomez getting an assist.
Shocking.
That must have been the Fulham game because he'd like come on and not done very much, but then he'd obviously got an assist in injury time and it's like, right.
Well, I was ready to give Doku and Alvarez a 6 each at Leipzig and then they get a goal and assist each. So.
Yeah. It's things like that. And I'm not saying like, we don't do our jobs properly, but it is one of those things where sometimes things get missed. And the amount of focus there is on ratings from people reading it is probably disproportionate to the amount of time we spend on ratings, just because it is just like a mark.
And we don't have the time after the game to, in an ideal world, we would go back and like with a sort of fresh pair of eyes. There's so much going on.
But it upsets fans. Sometimes it upsets players. It's like just there are a few games where I watched it back and I think, that was wrong, or that was wrong, or that was wrong. But also most of the time when people are disputing them, they're either sort of biased because they're family members or friends or whatever, or they're only like a point out.
Yeah.
And you sort of think, let's all be friends. Let's not.
It does seem to take a lot more prominence than we think it does.
Yeah, absolutely, And I remember like growing up reading the paper and seeing like what marks everyone was getting, and they're obviously displayed prominently in the paper. So it is a big thing, and it's it's the first thing we put out after a whistle. So it's like the first thing people see of like how we've seen the game.
Yeah.
So it has to be accurate to the best of your ability, but it is hard to judge, and like you say, giving 4 or 5 sevens after a 1-0 defeat might sound daft, but City in particular have a way of sort of playing quite well even when they lose. And again, you could say, well, they always play well, so that should be a 5 or a 6, and then if they lose, you take them off. But it's kind of like, just because they've lost, that shouldn't define the individual performances.
And the ones that get disputed, either online or in person or whatever, it's only ever 1 or 2, isn't it? Like the majority, everyone sees the same game.
Yeah.
And someone might have said, oh, well, Kovacic didn't get sent off, and he didn't play too badly and kept his head afterwards, so it's at a 6, but then you think...
Yeah, someone else would probably say it was a 2.
Yeah.
So, I don't enjoy ratings in that sense, because there is a lot of sort of discussion over not very much.
I made the mistake of replying to someone on Twitter about a rating they didn't like, and after a couple of back and forth they said, well, it's only a game of opinions, isn't it? I'm thinking, that's exactly...
Yes, yeah. But at the same time, it's, you want to see the game as everyone else does.
Yeah.
And you don't want to look kind of like you have watched a different game.
Yeah, you're not trying to be contrarian and
No.
well, actually, you did have a good game when
Yeah.
you conceded 3 own goals.
Yeah, exactly. So, I don't know about you, I will kind of sort of fill in as I go along, but try and kind of get a rough idea around. I have a quick think at half time, and then it's usually between 70 and 80 minutes when I sort of commit.
I think that's fair, yeah. I will write what I think is happening around maybe 50, 60 minutes. And then that's obviously first half heavy. And then things can change and you've got to sort of take out a few things, but ultimately you get it generally right, don't you? And reflective of the game. But then you also write in a lot more in the second half than you are in the first half because we've got these on the whistle pieces that we've got to file. So
yeah, and I also sort of, because I'm writing down actions because it is quite arbitrary. I'm always conscious that like I've always got like loads of first half did this in the first half, did this in the, and you want to make sure that you get kind of the full picture, which is why I sort of usually push it a bit later. But it's hard to get if you've written down something from the first half. You don't often want to kind of get rid of that almost.
So hopefully we've got people off our back now because it is just an opinion, and it's if someone scores a hat-trick in the last 5 minutes, then yes, they'll get a good mark. But
and if there's kind of an omission from a mark or rating, it's probably due to incompetence of not sorting it at the end, rather than just like trying to ignore that Erling Haaland has scored another goal or something like that.
And again, yesterday's a good example because 5 minutes from time we have to completely change everything we're doing because the entire story's changed.
Yes, and when that happens, you sort of think, oh dear. But it does make you think, because you think, well, do they still deserve these scores if they're losing the game?
Yeah, a solid performance turned into like, well, maybe should they have done more yesterday?
Although
City are good for often getting the game wrapped up around 60 minutes, and we can.
I would say my ratings were a lot more positive at full time than they were at half time.
Yeah.
Because half time came after sort of 20 minutes of Arsenal dominating the game. A sort of a bright start had been wiped out by, it looked like Arsenal were well on top. Whereas by the end, you're like, oh, actually both teams have had spells of momentum, and it's like we said, it was a 0-0 game basically with a goal. So you'd sort of like, City's plan was all right and the performances were all right in order to get what was set to be a draw at Arsenal. And you sort of have that in mind as well, because like, you know, marking them against Arsenal is different from marking them against like Oldham. You know, if
a lot of Oldham haters.
A lot of Oldham,
podcast.
Just, you know, incorporating the teams of the area. So it's, there is that involved, but you were sort of conscious that results should not be kind of the be all and end all, while at the same time adding points on for events that get results.
I suppose ratings are for performances, and your report is about the overall story and the performance. And I mean, if you've enjoyed this chat about ratings, then let us know, because we'll
talk about reports next week.
We can let you know about what goes into the mindset, and how we don't actually see much of the second half because our heads are in our laptops. But let us know, and keep watching the Talking City podcast. We'll be back throughout the international break, where City won't be playing, but a lot of their players will be on international duty, and hopefully when they come back they'll have an almost fully fit squad. Follow us at the usual places: Facebook, Twitter, whatever it's called, manchestereveningnews.co.uk. We've got 6,000 followers on TikTok and nearly 5,000 on YouTube, so if we can get to that 5,000 on YouTube, drop us a follow and a subscribe and whatever you need to do, and we'll be very much appreciated for that. And we'll be back shortly with another Talking City, but for now, thanks for joining us, and we'll be back soon.